Fans of the NBA, more than fans of any other league, love to talk about what ifs. What if Chris Paul was traded to the Lakers? What if the Thunder never split up? What if Derrick Rose was never injured? But there are some events that get much less attention, yet would have drastically shaken up the league. So let's discuss some of the biggest what ifs in recent NBA history. Number 1, what if Sam Hinkey stayed in the NBA? Sam Hinkey, as you probably know, is the controversial creator of The Process, the art of tanking and intentionally losing for high draft picks. For 3 years, Hinkey was the general manager of a historically bad 76ers team. They became a joke throughout the league, with fan attendance quickly plummeting during his tenure. While purposely tanking remains controversial, it can be forgotten that he made some pretty good moves during his time as general manager. Hinkey had an incredible influence on the use of stats in basketball, changing the way many front offices evaluate players. But beyond that, Hinkey did what you were supposed to do when you're the GM of a struggling team. He traded veterans away, he got draft picks, and he opened up cap space. Hinkey brought in a bunch of solid NBA players as well as a few gems. A few notable players he brought in during his tenure was Rookie of the Year Michael Carter-Williams, Nerlens Noel, Joel Embiid, Dario Saric, Jeremy Grant, Robert Covington, Jahlil Okafor, Rashawn Holmes, Markelle Fultz, Ben Simmons, and Furkan Korkmaz. He also gave Brett Brown his first head coaching job. While hindsight is always 20/20, many of these choices looked good at the time or were incredibly close to working out. Had the lottery been slightly different, this team may have been looking at talent such as Karl Anthony Towns or D'Angelo Russell. Not to mention at the time, Markelle Fultz and Ben Simmons were some of the best young prospects entering the league, and just about anybody would have taken them first overall. But a lot of these choices had a serious effect on the franchise and became why they are so successful today and how they almost made it to the finals a few years ago. Hinkey did not come into the league just to lose. Like any GM, he wanted to win, and he wanted the Sixers to be up against the dynasties such as the San Antonio Spurs and Golden State Warriors. But his time in the league was cut short. Looking back, it is odd that he never got that second chance or saw any time anywhere else. It is quite unusual for him to have never had another GM job or even spend time in another front office. He controversially got the 76ers to where they are, but now he remains blacklisted from the league. I am curious what it would look like if Hinkey remained. Would the 76ers have found other late round gems? Would they have still made the conference finals? Would they have made the finals? Would the Jimmy Butler trade have still worked out? How would the Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz situations play out? For better or worse, we can only wonder what Philadelphia would have been like with him in charge. Number 2, what if the Rockets defeat the Warriors in 2018? Looking back at this Rockets team is ridiculous. Built around Morey-ball, this was one of the most influential teams in basketball history, showing just how far the three-pointer could be stretched. And they showed that as they brought the 2018 Warriors to 7 games, narrowly losing if it weren't for infamously missing 27 straight three-pointers. The Rockets lost by only 9 points. If just 4 of those shots had gone in, 4 of 27, that's 15%. If they would have done that, they would have pulled off what would be the greatest upset in NBA history. Looking back, there are a ton of legacies that could have been altered in this game. First, obviously, is the Warriors. Their legacies, especially those of Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, would forever be hurt. And this would be one of the most damaging losses a player could have on his career. Meanwhile, this would be the first time that James Harden had led a team to the finals, and this would have huge ramifications for the three-pointer and its use in the league. If the relatively underpowered Houston Rockets could defeat this Warriors team, they may seriously alter how teams were to build in the future. Not to mention, if it's Harden and the Rockets up against the Cavaliers, I think we would have seen a much more competitive finals matchup. Who knows, maybe LeBron would have been able to pull it off against the Rockets. But regardless of how things would have played out, the legacies of Durant, Curry, LeBron, Harden, and Mike D'Antoni are all incredibly different if just a few shots go in. Number 3, what if Demarcus Cousins never got injured? Of all the what ifs dealing with injuries, what if Demarcus Cousins never got injured is up there with anybody else. The last time we saw his prime was over 5 years ago, and it's been a long 5 years. It is easy to forget that Cousins was on an all-time trajectory before his injury. He was arguably a top 10 player and a dominant big man in the league where the centers were being phased out. He had also just gotten paired with one of the most dynamic forwards of all time in Anthony Davis. His prime saw him scoring 27 points, 11 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. I don't think it would have been better than the current best centers we see today, as in Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic, but he certainly would be remembered better when looking back at this decade. I also really wonder how this Pelicans team led by Anthony Davis and Boogie would have looked like. As I said, the league was very suddenly turning into a perimeter-centric of play, but Cousins and Davis were the two best big men to survive that style of league. While other teams may have been able to go smaller, that means that no one would be able to match up against these two dominant players, both of which having the ability to stretch the floor a tiny bit. I don't know what their potential could have been, but I am really curious to see how they would have done against the rest of the league. And if Anthony Davis remains happy in New Orleans, that would drastically change the fate of teams who have made some pretty big trades with the Pelicans, such as the Lakers and Trailblazers. Number 4, what if Kyrie Irving never requested a trade? Twice. This is one that I think has a massive butterfly effect on the league. After not wanting to be the sidekick to LeBron anymore, Kyrie left the Cavaliers to command his own team in the Celtics. Then after only 2 seasons in Boston, he went to Brooklyn, mostly to be another sidekick to Kevin Durant. I generally think about what if Kyrie never left Cleveland far more than what I really should. Now, Cleveland would not have immediately stolen a championship from the Warriors. They still lost 4-1 against Durant and the Warriors in 2017, and I think the only difference is maybe they wouldn't have gotten swept in 2018. But should Kyrie have stayed, how much would have things really changed throughout the league? Because if he was still there, I am not sure if LeBron James would have left for Los Angeles. I think there would have been more of a reason for him to stay, and for better or worse, Cleveland would try and continue to build and compete with that current core. I don't know if that they would have defeated Kawhi's Raptors in 2019, but that is certainly an interesting thing to think about, especially seeing as superstar LeBron and Kawhi meet up again in the playoffs. But LeBron not being in Los Angeles also means that Anthony Davis likely doesn't go to the Lakers, or if so, he pairs with a different superstar there, and we probably don't see LA win the 2020 finals. LeBron and Kyrie staying in Cleveland also means that these Cavaliers never rebuild into the team that they are today. So we probably never see this Cleveland team have guys like Darius Garland, Colin Sexton, Jared Allen, or even Evan Mobley. But if we look at how good both LeBron and Kyrie were this season, remember in Cleveland, he would have been able to play the full 2022 season. There is no reason to believe that they still couldn't somewhat compete at their current ages. I don't know if that Cavaliers team ever could have won the finals, but if Kyrie never breaks up from the Cavs in 2017, they remain competitive for a pretty long time afterwards. And as far as Boston goes, that era in Boston will probably go down as one of the most disappointing teams in recent history. But it wasn't until Kyrie left Boston and they went through their own growing pains to where we see how much potential this group of Smart, Horford, Brown, and Tatum could be. Things were just not adding with Kyrie in the locker room, and if he had continued to stay there, we would have seen a team that probably looked great on paper, but really struggled on the court. While it is impossible to say what could have happened, I'm curious if Brown and Tatum would have developed in the same way that they did now. Would Tatum still be the arguably top 10 player he is now, or would the Celtics have had to make a choice between Tatum and Brown? Even still, if all that worked out, Kyrie has a track record of getting injured and missing significant time in the playoffs. How would things have worked out if he had stayed, yet continued to underperform or miss time in the most important part of the season? But with how things have worked out for them this year, I don't think Boston fans would change a thing from the last 5 seasons. Looking back, Kyrie choosing not to resign is one of the best things that has happened to them. And number 5, what if Kawhi never left Toronto? The 2019 Raptors are always one of my favorite teams to look back on, as they probably had one of the weirdest stretches of any NBA team. I mean, the year prior, they got the number 1 seed in the East, lost in the playoffs, Dwayne Casey won Coach of the Year after he was fired from the Raptors, they trade the best player in their franchise history for Kawhi Leonard, he defeats one of the greatest NBA teams of all time, and then Kawhi leaves for the Clippers. This Raptors team had a ton of long-term potential, and I think this could have still been a competing team to this day. Looking back at the core on this team, guys like Siakam, Van Fleet, and OG Anunoby are still on Toronto today, with Kyle Lowry and Norman Powell only recently departing. Should Kawhi have stayed, there is no reason to believe that they couldn't continue to be relevant today. After Kawhi left, they still won 53 games and lost in a close Game 7 to the Boston Celtics. With Kawhi there, I am almost certain that they would go on to make at least the 2020 conference finals. And who knows what would have happened if they went on to compete against that year's Miami Heat. Could Kawhi's all-time legacy be bigger if he had stayed? What would have happened to the dominant teams we see in the East today like Brooklyn, Boston, Miami, and Milwaukee? And also then, what would happen to the current Los Angeles Clippers and their state in the Western Conference? Kawhi signed as a free agent on July 9th, 2019, and the day after, Paul George was traded there. If Kawhi doesn't go to LA, what happens to Paul George? Would he have gone to the other California team? Would the Clippers try and pair him with someone else? Or do we see Paul George be the unequivalent, clear, dominant guy on another team, and what would that look like for his career? If Kawhi Leonard is never a Clipper, he never gives up a 3-1 lead, and he likely would have played the season as he would have never torn his ACL. But anyways guys, that is 5 recent NBA what ifs that keep me up at night. If you like this video, hit the like button and maybe consider following the channel.